How are you, man? I'm Gil Roth, and you're listening to a bonus episode of my Virtual Memory Show podcast. This is a COVID check-in episode where I record with a past guest of the Virtual Memory Show to find out how they're holding up during the pandemic. As far as how I'm doing, I'm good. Got a bunch of work done yesterday, finished the first issue of my zine last night, at last, and now I'm getting ready for a long run. The zine is going to need a round of heavy proofreading before I send it to the printer, but I have promised myself not to start editing or otherwise relitigating any of the writing that's in there. There'll be news about how to get a copy for yourself or how not to get a copy soon. Basically, 32 pages of my writing, photos, podcast excerpt, and more under the title Haiku for Business Travelers. Now, with that out of the way, because I'm always about self-aggrandizement, but in small doses, let's get to the show. David Small joins me from rural Michigan this time around. David is a Caldecott Medal-winning author and illustrator of kids' books, and also the author of a pair of graphic novels, Stitches and Home After Dark. Stitches is this amazing but really, really harrowing memoir about David's childhood, in which he was rendered mute and given cancer by his old man's misguided medical treatments. In case you thought you had issues with your father, or I did. Anyway, Stitches was a National Book Award finalist, which is a pretty good result for a first-time long-form comic author like David. But David and I met a few years ago at Small Press Expo when he was promoting his second book, Home After Dark, which is fiction, but also a really, really good piece of work. And we've stayed friends since then, which surprised me, as it always surprises me, because I've said this repeatedly. In my incredibly low self-esteem, I assume guests forget who I am the moment I leave the room. But we've stayed in touch, and we stayed friends. And in fact, after we finished recording this one, during the time it took to upload, we shot the breeze for a while. And David basically berated me for my great difficulty in just saying he was my friend. Like I was Fonzie trying to say I was wrong, But it's good. I'm glad I have friends. I'm glad I've made friends through the show. And I'm glad David's part of my life. Now, as caveats go, he was using his computer's internal mic, so it's got the standard, echoing, fuzziness, etc. And we talked over each other a few times, which leads to a couple of momentary silences and that general awkwardness that can happen. That is one of the perils of doing remote shows as opposed to in person, where I can read the other person much better. I will also note that for a guy who's had a lifelong struggle with his vocal cords, this is one of the longest check-in episodes I have recorded to date. Now, here's me and David. Let's just start with how are you coping? How is Southwest Michigan? What's the vibe, and how are you and your wife holding up?
Well, I must admit, not much has changed in our lives. I think if you had asked me 8 weeks ago, I would have made maybe a more nuanced, weirder response because I was having terrible anxiety dreams every night about the whole idea of a plague. And but that seems to have calmed down now. And we live way out. We're on the edge. We have two houses. One is my studio. One is this historic 1833 house on the bend of the St. Joe River. And it's surrounded by trees, very green, very cool, very peaceful. But then just south is the edge of what used to be the tall grass prairie, which covered, like 2/3 of this country. But it ended right here at our property. So if you're looking north or standing between our two houses or walking around in there, it's this quiet, paradise of peace and quiet and beauty. And then if you look south, you've got this basic lesson in 1-point perspective, especially when the corn is growing. Very flat, very empty, It's a strange place to live. I mean, we're very near a village, but it's a small, dead farming village. I've never liked the culture out here. I haven't gotten used to it. Of course, there's some terrific people you meet, but you can't share much with any of them, in terms of my upbringing. So, but anyway, I've never been happier to live out here than the last 9 weeks, because we really are isolated. I keep checking with Siri every week a couple times to find out how many cases are in our county, and I think there's only 100. So we're just we're very isolated. And besides that, like everybody else you talk to, Sarah's a writer, I'm an artist. We lead isolated lives. We're self-quarantining all the time. So this is nothing new. What's weird is that everybody else in the world is now living the way we do.
Right. And are you able to give people tips at all? Do you have any interaction with people who, don't share the general work from home, social isolation, hunched over a drawing table lifestyle?
Wow. Get a hobby. Keep busy. Build.
I just had somebody telling me that I'm being too productive in my social isolation, but
no.
The podcast, the zine, and all this other stuff. I'm like, no, I'll take that over. Anything else leads to more anxiety. I guess that's the question. Did you grow more acclimated to this scenario, or was it a case where your early fears about the scenario turned out to be unfounded and it's become easier to cope?
You're talking about the COVID scenario or living in Mendon scenario?
Yeah, well, I think that we'll stick with the COVID scenario.
Yeah, the living in Mendon, that's taken 30 years to adjust to. We watched the news. I thought when this began, because everybody else, at least the guests on your show, not everybody, but a lot of people were binging out on TV programs. And we had recently got streaming at our house, and I love movies. So I was thinking, well, this is going to be a time of a lot of screen watching, but that hasn't happened. We watch the news until it gets too disturbing night after night. And it was getting, so repetitive watching Rachel every night. But then this riot stuff happened. And now that seems to have eclipsed the virus in everybody's mind. Yeah. I mean, it certainly has mine, because it takes me back to when I was in Detroit in the riots in '67. It's so familiar. And I was thinking about this last night, and I looked up, I was thinking about, I was only 22 when the riot came along in Detroit, but there was this feeling in the whole city that it was going to happen. It was going to happen. It was just a question of when. And I thought to myself, that's sort of like it was for us boys growing up in Detroit. There was always this expectation that we might end up working in a factory. It was just part of the culture. And it wasn't something you shunned or looked forward to, but it was sort of inevitable unless you made a very conscious effort to take a different path. But that's what happened when the riots came. It was a surprise, but it was also anyway. I looked up the history of riots in Detroit. They were incredible in their amount and frequency over the years. I think the first one was in 1833, which was when the house I live in here was built. I mean, Michigan wasn't even a state, and there was a race riot.
Right.
Anyway, how'd I get off on that?
I've been wondering about that, not in relation to you, but just how that's, what that's doing to our psyches on top of, everything we were already straining with in terms of dealing with the quarantine, the pandemic, et cetera. So yeah, it's a
much bigger.
I don't even know. Yeah.
No, none of us do. Yeah. None of us do. Yeah. Anyway,
but you mentioned the not binging on things. Have you been able to focus not necessarily on watching TV, but reading, music, working on your own art and illustration?
Yeah, I mean, even for me,
has there been did you have a period of? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say time has warped in a funny way, like everybody else. I don't really know what day it is. Always sort of surprised when the weekend comes along because it's exactly like the week has been. And but that's the way I live. I mean, before COVID, I was always annoyed by weekends because it meant everybody in the publishing houses would go home. And then I was always happy when Monday came along because everybody would be back at work the way I am all weekend. I just work all the time. Yeah. I draw and I love it. That's my life. So, but now, for everybody, the days just blend into one another. And I don't know what else goes along with that for me.
Did you find any period of frustration or lack of focus, or was at least that part of your life not affected by the anxiety early on?
Well, I did when it occurred to me that, say, the novel that I'm illustrating right now, which is a very big project, might never be published, even though it's I signed a contract last early fall, and started working on it immediately. And have been working on it all winter without any guidance, except from the author sometimes, because the editors were all in a tizzy, and everybody went home, and then there was a long adjustment period where they had to adjust to working at home, and now that's all up and running. But then there was this. I remember talking to my agent. I said, "Look, do you think this book is ever going to be published, or any books be published?" She said, "I don't know." This was back in early April or late March. She said, we just don't know. Even if the publishers come back to work, we don't know if they're going to have access to the paper and, the distributors and all the people who make it possible to publish a book. And that did make me feel funny, I guess is the word. But I just kept plugging away. I just kept working.
Yeah. Have you gotten more guidance since, or has it still been, like the World War II Japanese soldier who just hid out into the 70s and just kept assuming the war was still going on? Not that I'm projecting or anything, but I'm sort of thinking that's basically where my life is going to be going.
Yes,
but anyway. But yeah,
that's a funny analogy. I don't know that story very well. I remember hearing it, but there is that sort of funny hermit.
Listen, you guys may be going back to work. I'm going to keep hiding out here in my house until I know things are safe, and then they'll all forget about me. But yeah, tell me about the book. Actually, what are you illustrating / adapting?
I'm working on illustrations for a novel by a woman named Betsy Bird, who. You don't know much about the kidlit world, I don't think, but Betsy has been a major influence in the world of children's literature for years. She used to work at the New York Public Library, and she became a critic, a very well-known, a very influential critic. And she's from Kalamazoo, which is the town close to us. And she... This is years after New York. She's in Evanston working in the library there, but I didn't know she was a writer. But she contacted me one day, I think 2 years ago, and she said she had this idea about a book that would be very closely connected to events that happen in my house and in my village here, concerning a woman named Madame Marantet, who was a horsewoman, side saddle horsewoman, and still is famous for holding the record for side saddle high jump and other things. And she was famous in her time back in the late teens and 20s. She and even before that, she dressed very Victorian. She traveled to Europe. She performed in her circus with for the King of England. She traveled with Buffalo Bill's traveling circus and also Barnum and Bailey. But she returned to Mendon when she retired. And Mendon has always been this little nowhere, nothing of a village. So the question raised by the young 12-year-old girl who's the focus of this book is, how do I be like her? How do I get out of here? How do I become famous? And why did she come back to this little shithole? Word that's not used in the book.
Yeah.
And
I assume, but yeah, only by our president. So.
Oh yeah. Anyway, I meant it's not used in children's literature. We do have some restraints in that.
I know. Yeah.
So
kids today, yeah.
So when Betsy came here to do research, and I met her for the first time, I was fascinated by the idea of the story, but I didn't commit to it because I wasn't going to commit to something I'd have to read 150 times and do pictures for. But when she finally came through with a manuscript, I thought it was just terrific, just so funny, such a great voice, such almost sometimes malicious humor, kind of teenage humor, I guess. Great plot, real suspenseful, and it takes place here. So that's what I'm working on. The other thing Madame Marantet was famous for was she trained a horse to pull a surrey alongside an ostrich. She raised ostriches on her farm here, and that was her big triumph at the end of her life. At the state fair, was doing this ostrich thing, and the ostriches figure big in the book. It's going to be called.
I would have to hope, and they must. Yeah.
Visually, they're much more interesting, but they're.
That's what I was going to say. You must just revel in being able to draw and paint ostriches. So.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's true. So other than that, because there have been long delays in the editor getting back to Betsy, and I'm living through one right now. I haven't heard anything I've already done 48 illustrations and more to come, and I'm not going to do any more until I've got a final manuscript in my hands. So I'm in the place where I have dreaded being for the last 9 weeks or whatever it is we've been in lockdown. And that is, what am I going to do next? What if I don't have this book to work on? And so I've gone back. I want to do something of my own, but I'm basically dry at the moment. And so I've gone back to a previous start on a graphic novel. It was a big start, rather complicated, and lots and lots of pages, which I don't have with me because my archives were sold last fall to Western Michigan University. And they came in a big U-Haul truck and took away all my sketches and all of my drawings, all my artwork, which was in a bedroom in these banker's boxes, practically floor to ceiling. And they took it all away, which is a tremendous relief to me, until I suddenly realized I wanted to work on this book again, and I can't get at it. Not because they won't let me. They said they'd do it digitally and give me some copies, but because they can't even get into their own vaults because of the COVID thing.
Yeah.
So until they get in there, and then I go over there and tell them what I want specifically, and they copy it for me, it's going to be a long time before I see that. So I'm doing something that's probably very healthy, which is trying to do it from memory. And
yeah, I was going to ask how much. Yeah, is it something that you can either reconstruct or come up with a better mode than the first time around? Do you think?
One would hope, and I think you're a writer. You've been through some of this, I think.
Never accuse me of that. But go.
Well, we'll see soon, won't we? You're coming out with your haiku book.
Yes,
I think it's good. I think it's kind of a winnowing thing, or a natural. I don't know, the cleft stick situations that I got into when I was trying to figure it out. I was trying to please my editor, Bob Weil. You know Bob, and Bob has he's done a great job on my other graphic novels, but he's not easy to talk to about graphic stuff. He's definitely a man of the word, and he understands sentences and words, and language, but pictures are hard for him to talk about. So I remember getting just completely tangled up in trying to give him something that he wanted and not succeeding until I realized, wait, this is not Bob's strong point. He recognizes he's a great curator of graphic novels. He's published some great ones by Jules Pfeiffer and so on. And so I realized I had to go find somebody else to help me on that book. And I didn't find anybody. So I just abandoned it actually in midstream and jumped on another idea, which became a book called Home After Dark, which you and I talked about a couple of years ago.
Sure.
So I'm going back to this.
So the idea of returning to it? Yeah. And when you talk about the drawing, is it something where the visual aspect of it would be different than either of the first two graphic novels? Or is it just that, Bob wasn't going to be able to really deal with the vocabulary of, graphic storytelling in a way that's mattered with the editorial process?
Yeah, Bob, like a lot of people, I think, are incapable of getting what's going on in a graphic book, especially in sketches. People who don't fully get it, that they'll look and they'll say, now, wait a minute, is this the same person in this panel who was in the last panel?
Those of us who can't draw envy you guys immensely. That's I think that's the big tell here, is that I can't draw. I don't understand how you do this. And all the stages from beginning to end would be incomprehensible to outsiders like us. Yeah.
Well, that's sort of like writing is for me. It's a real struggle.
Yeah.
But I have to do it because even unless you're attempting the impossible, which is a wordless graphic novel, it's been done, but so rarely with any real aplomb. There have to be some words, at least in terms of my books. I need some. Yeah. I hate expository prose. I hate that. That's my worst bugaboo. But sometimes it's necessary to clarify what you're trying to do in pictures, exposition is a horrible thing in a graphic novel, to indicate who's the father, who's the son, who's related to who. You have, just cut through that, to do that, just use a few words to tell that stuff. Because, I don't know, Lynn Ward was able to do it in God's Man, that classic.
Sure.
But, not very many Lynn Wards around.
And even that involves writing. It's not putting text on the page, but, composing and you know what I mean, that from panel to panel, that is still a form of writing that you're engaged in. It's just, solely visual. So you're selling yourself short in those terms is what I mean. The very fact that you tell stories so well, you can write, and I think the prose complements it pretty well. But But that's just me being, a fan of your work, I guess.
Well, thanks. But you're narrating, whether you're using words or pictures. You're a narrator, and you're following a certain line, expository line or descriptive line. You've got to move the camera around in a way that people know where they are. I learned more from movies than anything else. The old ones, especially, where they weren't so bent on freaking you out every second of your life while you're watching the film. The Hitchcock's films that took their time, did it in an entertaining way, but were very careful to make sure you understood where you were all the time.
Yeah. Are you a TCM movie binger at all? The TCM channel? That was Pfeiffer's big thing when I got to sit down with him. He's like, honestly, if it weren't for TCM, I wouldn't own a TV. That he just loved having old movies on. So.
Well, because he loves film noir, and that's his. Yeah. Jules is those graphic novels that he did. My cousin Joel.
Right. That's all informed by.
It's all informed by 40s, the late 30s and 40s movies. Can I say this? I wonder if Jules is listening. I hope I don't offend him, but
his hearing is shot apparently, so we don't have to worry about it. Go on.
He actually he was so kind to me that when Stitches came out, he helped promote the book. It was terrific. And then one day, about a year later, he called me up and he said he had this manuscript and he wondered if I'd be interested in illustrating it, making a graphic novel out of it. It's called Kill My Mother. I love the title. I said, then of course it was Jules, and I was honored as hell. But when I got it, when I received the manuscript, I was like 50 pages in, and I realized I couldn't do it because it wasn't my period. It relied so much on those old, Fred McMurray, Barbara Stanwyck movies, and that kind of dress. And I was born in 45, so the movies I relate to were all after that. And then I really became a movie buff in the 60s. So it's just not my period. That's all. So Jules said, Jules,
I was going to say, so you're 15, 20 years too young.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, go
on.
And
I told Jules to go illustrate his own book. He's a genius artist. And he said, David, the last thing I want to do is illustrate that effing book. And then he went ahead and did it. He did it. He did a great job.
His description of discovering that he could draw that long a book was just liberating. I think he was like 85, 86 at that point, and he was just like, I didn't know. I had no idea I could do 120 pages. Look, of all the podcasts I've done, one of the all-time great moments was being at Jules' house in Long Island and having him say, "Do you want to see some pages from the next book? I've got them over here in my studio." And I was like, yes, Mr. Pfeiffer, that would be wonderful. And he's just page after page of the transparencies with the lettering on them. And it was just, I'm like, oh my God, Jules Pfeiffer is just showing me pages. This is like childhood Gil would have melted down. And adult Gil was melting down at that point too. So it was a great moment. But I had no idea that, he didn't want to do the book himself originally. That's interesting.
He was very hesitant, but he had done some long books, and he'd done some children's books where you're 32 pages long, but that's nothing like a graphic novel.
Right.
Yeah. So
now, when you talk about children's books, sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, I'm glad he did it. I mean, it would have been great to have worked with Jules Pfeiffer, and but to be honest, I didn't want to.
I would have just been
I would have been second guessing myself.
Reasons.
I would have been doing it for the wrong reasons. Yeah.
That's the thing. Even if I was an artist, I would be second guessing myself on everything. Like, Jesus, I'm going to put in what Jules Pfeiffer didn't feel like drawing. I just wouldn't be able to. But then I have horrendously low self-esteem. So anyway, you talk about children's books. Thank you. Do you think about, given your history with children's books and sort of the concepts and stories you tell in them, how on earth you would explain this whole situation we're in to young readers? Because,
I've thought about it vaguely, but because I don't have any intention of doing a COVID book for kids, I have just flicked it off the table. But people are doing them. I just looked at what are they calling it? It's from the Carl Museum. They did a thing for online. It's called Art in Place. And they contacted, I think, 20 of us illustrators and just wanted to know how we're doing, like you're checking up on me today, and what we're working on, and send us a photograph of you in your studio. And I looked at it, and I'm on it. I did make a statement. I did send them what I'm doing, and I did show them a picture of my studio, but I'm not in it because I'm camera shy. But I looked at, for example, Nguyen Pham. She's a American Vietnamese artist who's just terrific. She's a wonderful illustrator. And she's doing a COVID book about, I think the premise is from a child's point of view, and the premise is like, the city used to be a really busy place. And then suddenly it was like nighttime. There's nobody on the streets. And that's the premise. And that's shown visually, there's suddenly empty streets, twilight. And I don't know where she's taken it, but I suppose it will have something to do about being with mom and dad inside and, playing games, wondering where my friends are. And I don't know. I don't like, I think that's a good idea. I think, I'm sure Wen will pull it off beautifully. But some of these books, even pre-COVID, the direction of children's books has kind of disturbed me because people seem to have run out of stories to tell, and people seem to have run out of characters to build. And kids' books nowadays have become very lessony and all about self-empowerment. And I just think if I was a kid, I think I'd be bored out of my skull by those books. Of course, they're enlivened by fantastic art. The art in kids' books has gone back to the 40s now, when there was this shift from, say, John Tenniel, Alice in Wonderland, adult editorial stuff in Punch, to pictures by people like Gustav Tengren and all the guys who were involved in making the Little Golden Books. All the art suddenly became exclusively for children, beautiful colors and simple figures. And that's come back now. And because the computer-generated art has made it possible to make paintings that are just as complex and wonderful as those old things that were done in gouache paint were, and even more. They can do even more. There's some great stuff being done digitally. But in kids' books, like I said, the art is generally getting really good, but the story is, I don't know. There are no stories.
Just preachy?
Preachy.
Yeah. You say it's just messaging instead of a story they can latch on to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's when I was starting to ask you about, like, how would you tell children? I realized the way I was asking it, I'm like, yeah, that's going to sound like, do you have a message, a way to convey to kids, as opposed to, telling them a story and drawing them into this whole situation that we're in, I guess.
Yeah, and you know what? I knew when I got into kids' books that I didn't want to do lesson books because children can smell a lesson from a mile off. And they might be sitting there with their eyes open and looking all alert, but that's all to please you, the dad who's sitting on the bed reading this thing. In their minds, they're going off on some kind of adventure instead of these lessony books. Brush your teeth.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to
Eat your
imitate
broccoli.
them. Eat your broccoli. I don't even know how. You know what? Talking about brush your teeth, there are no books out there. I don't think there have ever been any books about going to the dentist that anybody ever wanted to read, except for one, which is a terrific story by old William Steig, who was a genius.
Yeah.
It's called Dr. De Soto, and it's about a dentist who's a mouse who has to pull the tooth of a wolf. And he gets lowered into the wolf's jaws on this elaborate kind of pulley mechanism. Oh, it's amazing. It's full of suspense. Kids love it. It's the only dentist, but, and there's not a lesson in it. It's just a great story with great characters. What happened to those books? Where'd they all go?
Marketing.
Yeah.
It's all triangulating marketing and figuring out how do you optimize this, that, and the other. And one thing, though, you mentioned in our emails, like March into April, I guess, you were thinking about working on a sequel to your Imogene's Antlers.
Oh, yeah. Is that something I did it.
Fell by the wayside, or? Oh.
No, I did it. It's supposed to come out this fall, but now who knows?
Gotcha. Okay.
Guess what the title is?
So,
Imogene Comes Back.
I can't begin to imagine. Okay, that's better than Imogene's Antlers, the remixing or something.
Yeah. Imogene branches out. Impossible to find a title. Just call it Imogene 2. Yeah, it's 35 years old, that book, the first one. So I got a letter from a editor I didn't know at Knopf, which is part of Random House, who owns the book. And she said, we'd love to do something at Random House to celebrate Imogene's 35th birthday. And I thought, oh, well, great, do a poster or something. And she said, do you have a sequel? And I said, no, I'm not going to write a sequel. I never intended to write a sequel. I created that character and that family for that one situation. What am I supposed to do? Keep turning her into things, turning into a toaster oven, turning her into, and she said, well, there's a young editor here who has an idea we'd like to send to you. I said, okay. So they sent along this idea, and it was pretty good. I mean, she does go through some more transformations, turns into other animals and so on, which, of course, her family, she's born into a family that doesn't understand her at all. And in the end, she emerged in this young woman's version as herself, as a young girl. And then came the lesson. Imogene learned that she didn't have to be this or that, to be special. She was special all by herself. And that made me barf. And I began thinking, excuse the young editor, I forget your name if you're listening, but it did make me barf. But I began thinking, and I thought, okay, but maybe we could end it in a little more evil way. And I figured out what that way is, and everybody loved it, and I wrote and illustrated the book last fall, and I think it's darn good. I'm happy I did it. And
there's that sense of kid. Oh, sorry. Go on. Yeah.
No, I ended. Sorry.
I was going to say there's just that sense that kids, I think evil is a great way to put it. I think of Tommy Ungerer, of course, as evil kid storyteller.
Genius. Yeah.
But yeah.
That's what I mean.
Sense of,
that kind of ending. Yeah. Not a sweet platitude, but that kind of, I loved Tommy Unger. I loved his way of telling stories. And I loved, when I was a kid, I ran home to watch every episode of Alfred Hitchcock because I loved the way those things ended with those drum beats and that uncertainty about how things were going to go from here.
Yeah. So raising kids evil, I'm perfectly fine with. I guess I'm good with that. Of course, I don't have any. So, my last question though, your health. You sound better. Your voice sounds better than it did back in, 2017. I think when we met at Small Press Expo. How have things been? You got some of your voice back. Does that invalidate stitches? And how are things on that front in general? I'm joking about invalidating stitches.
Yeah, the book means nothing now that I can speak. No, that's a whole subject that I could expound on, I suppose, if I wanted to, about being silent as a kid and then having my voice taken away. The psychological impact of that will never, ever go away. But my health is good. I turned 75 in February. Because I can't count, I actually had thought the entire year before that I was 75, but no, I was 74. So here I am at 75, and I have some complaints, like everybody who lives this long does, but I don't center on them. I've got it's just sort of interesting talking about stitches. I did find out a couple of years ago that I have something called CLL, which is chronic lymphocytic leukemia. And that word freaked me out when I first heard it, but it turns out to be a very benign, very, very, very slow developing form of cancer in the blood and the lymph system. And it comes from radiation. So, radiation in my life, it's like the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, you don't get superpowers. I know.
No, you don't.
They sold us a fake bill of goods when I was a kid on the whole Hulk and X-Men thing. And the Fantastic Four, none of that shit held up.
I never would have laid down on that table if I'd known. Yeah. So, but anyway, I've got
radioactive
CLL.
Spider. But,
yeah. I wish. So, but everybody's got something wrong with them when they reach 75, and it just sort of proceeds from there on. And too many people talk about it, and who wants to hear that crap? But I was thinking about this last night. I thought, when this stuff starts to happen to you, whether it's arthritis, something benign like that compared to cancer, or, the way the body starts to fall apart and this thing that you've been walking around in for decades and decades suddenly is revealing these caverns and nooks with things in them you never knew or suspected. People talk, here in the Village of Minden, it seems to be at tables, in the restaurants, you can hear the talk. They're talking about it as if, I've got this, I've got that. Oh, it's like, I've just been to Greece, or I just saw the Stones have done it. It's like they've suddenly visited a really exotic country, and that's all they talk about. Would that it was, world travel, and that they were more broader mentally, but no, they center now on these things that are going wrong with them with a kind of amazement and fascination. And I don't know where I'm going with this. Not any place very nice, I think, but
I'd say that's the situation for old people, quote unquote, in general. We always joke it's old Jewish couples and their friends. It's just, exchanging who's got what illness or who's seeing what doctor. But
right. And I'm
it's good to know that it carries over to rural Michigan.
Yeah. Well, right. There are no Jews out here, unfortunately. Conversation is pretty dull around here.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to bring that up. I'm sorry to say that because I know your dad is in a home. And
no, my old man lives at home with his girlfriend. He's just
does he? Good.
His health has been his health has been crappy enough that if he gets exposed to COVID, it's going to be his ass in like 2 minutes. So, I haven't seen him since February, but based on our relationship, that holds up just fine. And we're both good with that. My mom's in assisted living out in St. Louis, but that again is just a being in your 80s and not being, able to go up and down stairs as easily.
Yeah.
You have to start making those accommodations.
Right.
But when you mentioned not having any Jews around, are you in contact with Jews? Do you get to talk to Jews or just old friends? Are you reaching out to people,
Yeah.
outside of your immediate physical area?
Yeah, I've got some friends from the old neighborhood in Detroit. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and I don't claim anything by that, except that my friend, I knew a few.
There were good delis around. That's it.
What?
Yeah.
What did you say?
There were good delis, and there were good delis.
Yeah.
And
bagels, lox. That was part of my childhood.
Yeah.
So I feel a kinship there, and I miss it. But I have friends. I've got illustrator friends I talk to regularly. There's one in San Francisco. There's a couple in New York. But these are people with. Nah, I don't want to go in that direction. We were talking about Jews.
Okay. No, I just mean friends in general. Do you find yourself either hearing from people you haven't heard from in a million years who just want to say hello, check in and see how you're doing?
Yeah.
Or are you doing the same thing with other people that you haven't been in touch with?
Not a ton of them, but I do have, I live in this isolated place. I sit here in my studio all day, and I pick up the phone every week and call somebody and have a chat for 2 or 3 hours. And,
Nice.
I have an ex-student who's an artist who teaches in Lancaster, and he and I have Friday night cocktail hour every week. And we talk about movies, we talk about whatever books we've been reading. So I have an active social life, but it's all through my ear. And I like that. I prefer that to Zoom. I don't like having to keep the conversation going and read expressions at the same time. I kind of doing it audio, just in audio, the way we're doing it, it sort of compels me to complete a sentence or complete a thought or.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's better that way.
Yeah, the video thing I am totally averse to. There's only been one meeting where a conference call where they insisted I go in by video. And, I told them, you got to understand, not only is it pandemic hair, I haven't put on anything but shorts or sweatpants for 2+ months. I am not dressing up for this. I told them I'm in a t-shirt and a ratty cardigan right now. If that's not going to affect your image of me, then that's cool. We'll do video. But otherwise, if you want to have some pristine idea of Gil in a suit, which is how you always see me, well, I'll put up a fake image or something like that instead.
And you grew a beard,
I think
too.
audio only is better.
You also grew a beard.
Yeah, I started that in November. Yeah, I've been working to keep that under control because I've had beards that I've let go and it's not pretty. So I've managed to keep it to like Hugh Laurie in the TV show House. I keep it to that level. So
I tried. During this COVID thing, I tried growing the beard, and Sarah liked it. She said it looked handsome, and that surprised me. And I kind of surprised myself in the mirror too. I liked it because it was covering up some of the wrinkles in my neck. And
that's one of the keys. Yeah,
that's one of the reasons, I guess. But I took it off because it itched. I couldn't stand that. And besides, you're supposed to keep your fingers away from your face, and mine were constantly clawing at my cheeks.
Yeah.
So I got rid of it.
Oh yeah, no, I'm always doing the chin stroking beard thing. Yeah, I if I ever was in a scenario where I actually get exposed to anything outside of, the fact that I'm in this house all the time, I would be more concerned about it. But all things considered, I'm getting by okay here in pandemic land.
Well, but just getting back to the beard, I have to say, I liked your face pre-beard. I really liked your face.
Well,
you've got,
if I go back to it, I'll send you pictures. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, I need your address because I didn't save that tube, so I can send you a Haiku for Business Travelers when it's out. So
good. I'll give it to you later.
I'll give you something to look forward to in the mail.
Yeah.
Cool. Real last question. You mentioned talking with your friend every Friday about what you've been reading. What have you been reading?
What I've been reading. Let's see. Lately, I started reading funny, a bunch of trash when the COVID thing came down. I just wanted something that would just sweep my mind away. But I got bored with all of it. Every book, every trashy book I picked up didn't satisfy me. And so I went for a long time without reading anything. And then somebody turned me on to this book called The Printmaker's Daughter by Catherine Gouvier, which was about the daughter of the Japanese artist, 17th century artist Hokusai, the great wave guy.
Yeah, the wave. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fiction, but it's incredibly well researched and beautifully written in this kind of Japanese style, which I don't know how this white woman in Toronto achieved this quite, but I found it fascinating, first because I'm a big Hokusai fan ever since I was a student, studied Japanese prints, learned everything I know about composition from them, but also the human story about this interaction between this ugly, sensuous woman who became an artist, who helped her father complete his prints when he wasn't able to, when he was in his late 80s, and made some of the art that is still considered his. And they're in a relationship with her dad. I thought that was fascinating. And now I'm reading, I picked up The Plague by Camus. That seemed necessary.
As one does, yeah.
As one does. Mm-hmm. And I found it just so much better than I had found it when I was 14 and tried to read it. Not only because of what's happening now, but because I'm older. And it's not a book that should be read by high school students, I think. And I got halfway through it.
There's a lot of books like that turn people off. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, exactly. Turn people off to literature, period. But I couldn't go on with The Plague. So now I picked up John Cheever, a book I never read of his called The Wapshot Chronicle, which he got the National Book Award for. And I'm just astounded by his prose once again. And I was thinking last night as I put it down before I went to sleep, I thought, how did he do this? And why is it that people can't write like this anymore? Maybe they never could. Maybe he was the only one, but he's just such a genius stylist. Yeah. And I'm getting into Truman Capote,
I've only read
too.
Stories. I haven't read the...
Oh.
Yeah?
Well, yeah, the stories are the best, I think.
Yeah, I've only done the stories so far, so I haven't done the Cheever novels yet, so I've got a lot ahead of me. Do you have any sort of pandemic reading project that, book X is something I've always wanted to get to now that, there's no expectations and the world is falling apart? I guess I can read it.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I do. I was going to say I just ordered a whole bunch of Truman Capote books off the internet because, for one thing, he appears at the beginning of my graphic novel as a homunculus, warning me that I never should have moved to the country and lived in a house at the end of a road, so far from my neighbors that they wouldn't be able to hear it when I get my brains blown out in the middle of the night. But as I was telling my friend Brad in Minneapolis, who's a writer, the other day, I mentioned that, and he said, you and I never talked about In Cold Blood. I think about you all the time since I visited you out in Michigan about that movie. I think, and
that's not making you feel better.
No, but then he added, and because I listened to Brad Zeller is his name, I listened to whatever he says and buy whatever he says to read because he's really got unusual and good taste. And he said, Capote, he was, everybody remembers him for In Cold Blood, but just read the rest of the stuff and you'll see he was one of the greatest stylists of the 20th century. So I got some of the early stuff, Other Voices, Other Rooms, Grass Harp, as well as the later, I understand that they were failures and, like Unanswered Prayer or Answered Prayers and Music for Chameleons, those are on their way. But I understand they're also full of malicious gossip, and I like that aspect. So.
Nice. Well, I'll let you get back to it. I'm glad things are less anxiety ridden than when this all started. I'm in the same boat. Like that March into April,
Good.
There were more sleepless nights. Now there's more of a adjustment / realization that our lives are really truncated and narrow to begin with. But,
And the weather, change in the weather helps too. Helps sleeping, I think.
I think so.
Gil, it's just been delightful. I'm glad you asked me to come back on.
And that was David Small. Go check out his graphic novels, Stitches and Home After Dark, as well as his great and extensive catalog of kids' books. His website is davidsmallbooks.com, and that's got links to his books, his fine art, the galleries that sell his work, news items, some of his favorite bookstores, and more, as well as contact info. David is smart enough not to be on social media. Maybe he's on Facebook, but I'm not. So you should visit the site to learn more about him and check out our full-length episode, which he links to there. It's spelled just like it sounds, DavidSmallBooks, davidsmallbooks.com. We'll be back tomorrow with another COVID check-in. Visit either of my sites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM, to find a link to the COVID-19 sessions with all of these daily episodes, as well as my full archives of 370 or so in-person ones that I recorded in the before time. You can also subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show via iTunes, Spotify, TuneIn, YouTube, whatever. Or you can use your favorite podcatcher just by grabbing our RSS feed from either of the sites. And that way you'll get every episode, both the full-length ones and the bonus COVID check-ins as they come out. Now, as far as housekeeping goes, I am doing fine with money. My job pays well. My expenses are down because of quarantine life. So don't worry about supporting the podcast, at least not financially. The only support I need is the occasional email or letter to let me know that you're out there listening. If you can spare money, then go find the Patreons, GoFundMes, Indiegogos, Kickstarters, tip jars, whatever the crowdfunding model is for the artists and writers you like. Show them some support, because a lot of them are in need right now. If you're not comfortable giving to individuals, then find some worthwhile charities, like your local food bank. On top of that, the protests and police violence that are going on right now have led to a lot of people being hauled off to jail. So there are plenty of bail funds out there that you can contribute to, like that Minnesota Freedom one. But I'm not going to recommend any specific ones. I haven't vetted them. I just don't know which are legit and which could turn out to be a scam. But in principle, it's a worthy cause. Do your homework. And, there are a lot of people and a lot of causes that can use a hand right now. So if you're in a position to help in any way, then help. I am Gil Roth. It is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020, and this was a bonus episode of my Virtual Memory Show podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Keep the conversation going, stay safe, and wash your damn hands.